Hi, Nancy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Nick and Juliana?
Hi,
G-
Nancy.
Good, good. I've been reading your book over the last few weeks, Reaping What She Sows, How Women Are Rebuilding Our Broken Food System. Congratulations. It's really a
Thank you.
great read.
Thank you.
So, how did this book come about?
Well, I've been writing about agroecology and regenerative and sustainable agriculture for many years now. And I think the seed of this book was really sown probably about 6 years ago. I was doing a story on grass fed beef, and I was talking to a rancher, Corey Carmen, who's in Eastern Oregon, 100% grass fed beef. She's on an 8,000 acre ranch. And it was a fascinating conversation. She was describing how she was kind of trying to build from the ground up a regional supply chain, really.
Hmm.
So she's got the ranch, but she has other ranchers in her group. They needed processing facilities, they needed distributors, they needed a whole network because what's happened across the United States and in much of the world is that the sort of small and regional supply chains and food systems have all gone away as industries have consolidated. You have a handful of really large corporations that are global, huge, long supply chains, and they're controlling everything. So, what the women in my book are doing is really rebuilding these small and medium sized food systems. And of course, they're much more climate resilient. They use good practices that are rebuilding soil and not polluting waters. And they're nourishing local economies, giving you much healthier food. So there were so many reasons to want to champion these women. And then when the COVID pandemic happened, I just felt like people are finally understanding what a supply chain is, number one. And then realizing with all these food shortages and frontline workers at meat packing plants getting sick, realizing that wow, this is a thing and I'm part of it, and there's actually alternatives because people had to go to the alternatives during the pandemic. So it was kind of eye opening, and I felt like maybe it was good timing to write about this.
About now.
I was just saying that
Yeah.
these different relevant reasons to be talking about this, addressing this, and showing it and to the world, how how the solid way in which she is articulating all this. It's very clear, very consistent, and this is why, and this is what I'm doing. This is why women, and this is why now.
Thank you.
Um, yeah,
I'm
so
glad it was
very
clear.
powerful.
So, what has been happening with small farmers in North America since COVID? Has it been positive, negative?
It has been positive until the current administration. I would say the Biden administration made a number of moves that put more money into conservation practices and soil building and a lot of things that the producers that I write about really champion. And so, we're still talking about a very small percentage of all farming, but it was sort of making progress. And sadly, a lot of that has been rolled back under the current administration. And so I feel that the kind of the lessons of my book and the stories that I tell, which are really about mutual support and building knowledge networks, and because you're such a it's such a David and Goliath type of situation because you're so at a disadvantage. You really have to rely on these knowledge networks and these networks across regions and even countries to share knowledge, to support each other, and to really try to get people to transform the way they're farming, the way they're fishing, the way they're thinking about how they source and eat food. So it's very challenging right now.
Hmm.
There's a lot that is being taken away, these little gains that were made. Um, And so it's a weird time for the book to come out because, I mean, I kind of knew that this was coming.
Yeah.
And you know how it is, you have a year to get the book edited, and the election happened. And so I kept adding little things in
Yeah.
the prologue and in the epilogue about, okay, this has happened, this is not good.
Yeah.
And it's also really important to know that this is a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
So farming is changing all the time, and you know, some of the things already that I write about in my book are either businesses have closed or situations have changed. So it's, I guess it's one thing frustrating about a book as opposed to, you know, a magazine article or a newspaper article where the turnaround is so fast.
Yeah, but I mean, that's always going to happen. Even though this current administration obviously is so disruptive at every level, like in a scale that I've never seen in my lifetime. But there's always, from one administration to the next, there's always, policies that are changing. Like nothing's ever the right time, I think.
Yeah, and I was just going back to an article I wrote several years ago for Civil Eats, which was this really inspiring book. I think it was called In the Struggle, about the Central Valley in California and how from the 40s on, big agriculture was doing so much to take away water rights from small farmers. To really, there was progressive times in American history where there were laws on the books that supposedly protected these small farmers and their water rights. But the lobbies and the power of these big agricultural giants, I mean, even then was so powerful that there was sabotage, there was violence, there was
Hmm.
all of these things, and you realize, yeah, it's been going on a long time. These kinds of attacks are not new, and things are cyclical, and people have to keep doing their organic or regenerative thing in the
Yeah.
face of all these and try to get the support. So I feel like my book is like a little cry for, look, there's this
Yeah.
whole other alternative food system that you can be plugging into, and you would be doing a lot of good if you do it. And I think I just wanted to tell the story of these women because they're so amazing. They're working so hard. The odds are not with them in many ways, but I think the community building aspect and the educating customers and really feeling like you belong to a system is very satisfying. And I think it's what keeps a lot of them in business and going when it's, you know, when the work itself is so hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of the women in this book, they're building these alternative systems that are, I would hope, more resilient. Even though the odds are long, they are building these networks that ideally depend less on, you know, governments and, in big industry, and they can create something that it doesn't matter, what, you know, weird dream Trump had the night before and, woke up and just, destroyed, 10,000 acres in Montana or whatever.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I just really admire, like in the oceans chapter, there's a woman who was a middle school teacher, and she happened to marry the son of a fisherman who had grown up on the waters in British Columbia and really loved fishing. And she realized, even though she grew up in Vancouver, she had not grown up with fresh fish. She actually hated fish because what you were getting was basically caught maybe off the waters of BC, sent to China to be
Hmm.
processed, and sent back frozen, and it was not good. And she said for the first time in her life, she was tasting really amazing fish. And then she also saw how if you were a small fisherman in this era where the fishing industry is controlled by giant corporations, private equity firms who are just looking at it as a money generating venture, you really were completely shut out of the market. And there was this very complicated system of buying permits and rights, and so many ways that the market was structured so that these small fishermen and her husband had grown up in this industry. So he was really helpful in sort of telling me what it was like when he was young and how things had progressively gotten worse. So on her maternity leave, she just started this fish CSF, which is sort of like the fish version of a CSA.
Hmm.
You sign up for a box,
Yeah.
and it's become huge now. They realize that to extend their reach, they can process right there on the dock. They can flash freeze, and I can order their boxes in Toronto,
Okay.
and it's all labeled with the name of the fisherman. And it was a really cool thing to research because she also began to realize that indigenous fishers were really, really shut out of the market in a major way. So she made it her goal to try to reach out to them and try to recruit these women indigenous fishers. And so we went to a reservation on Vancouver Island, met with people from the Tshot tribe, and so I was able to tell the history of their fishing rights and how they've been taken away. So many of the stories do sort of go back to indigenous practices, or sort of like the original people who were farming on the land. So the whole thing was fascinating, but that's just one example of the kind of very cool thing that I was able to report on and document.
Yeah.
Yeah, you like there's a lot of like great stories, and you traveled a lot for this book,
Yeah,
right?
it was a lot to do.
For
I
your
mean,
books in
I know. I
general.
don't know if it's like that with yours, but I had a year.
Yeah.
Did you? Was yours the same?
I have a year and a half. I'm still going at it. Like it's still
And I
it's
don't know
still
how you're
Doing
doing all this.
uh,
And it, are you
I
still doing the reporting, or
I'm sorry.
are you still doing the reporting?
Yeah, I'm still doing the reporting and traveling and writing, and I have until basically February to send everything in.
I
But
know.
it's
I mean, I hear about other writers who somehow have longer, and I want next time I want a longer deadline because it's
so I have a year and a half, even though this is something I've been working on for 20 years technically, but I did have a year and a half because there was no possible way I could do it just because there's like specific seasons I need to go
right.
places for, and it's like they overlap, so there was no way I could have.
I
But
did.
I wish I had longer.
I know
Yeah.
it's really hard, and I mean, I got maybe 3 months of a grace period. Yeah, that was helpful, but it was really a sprint to the deadline.
Yeah, I am.
So
I'm feeling it now, even though I still
yeah,
have a while.
good
Yeah.
luck.
There is something you touch up touch upon on, which is, I think, the key of. I mean, it's so related with inequality and economic systems that are not viable in the long term, which is who owns the land, right?
Hmm.
It seems every economic and social problem seems to end in that question: who is owning the land? And in this case, you look at that through women, and empowerment of women. But in the end, the problem with big corporations and monocrops and large scale production of food, it's that. Are the farmers working for them really owning the land? No. So, and their local food systems, right, which is the whole idea about food sovereignty. So I'm curious about how, in your conversations with them, how do they see that, and how do they relate with that challenge?
Yeah,
Oh,
no, it's a
it's
huge
gone
issue.
again.
I think globally, just young farmers' access to the land
Yeah,
because it's gotten so expensive. And unless you're inheriting a farm, you can't afford it.
yeah,
There's organizations like the American Farmland Trust, which I didn't really get to talk about much in my book, that really are there to help figure out ways to get young farmers on the land. So, for example, in my dairy chapter, I interviewed a mix. I was able to connect with a really wonderful small cohort of women dairy, grass-fed dairy farmers.
mm,
And so they had kind of like a group that met via Zoom or in person. So I was able to sort of join their meetings and that was one of the most depressing chapters to write because so many of them
Mm.
were totally underwater and really not being able to make a profit. And so many were going out of business. There was so much consolidation going on. And this was in Vermont, which you
Yeah.
think is like filled with lovely little farms. But
Yeah.
this whole consolidation thing has been going on there. So these women, I felt like were just so beleaguered, and a lot of the talk was about stress and not not being able to make a profit, and even the dairy family that was a member of Organic Valley, which I've always thought of as a wonderful co-op, worker owned, and fair treatment and very local. Even they were not able to make a profit at the time. This is one of the chapters, by the way, that the situation's really changed since I wrote the book. So I feel bad that I'm painting this incredibly depressing, dire picture. And now, thanks in part because some of the activists in the chapter who have been saying to
Mm.
government, something has to change,
Yeah.
things are getting a little bit better, and it's not quite as dire as I pictured it. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that this is small group is a mix of generational farmers who have inherited their farms. So, they've got the land, it's in their family, and that's great for them. But then there was one or two who were first generation farmers. And for them, even the one, Ashlyn, who I feature in the book, she said, we were fortunate we got some help from her husband's family to help purchase the land. And this is not a huge parcel of land.
Yeah.
But they're they're just like one little group that's an example of how hard it is to just make a living doing this kind of farming. But and then the whole land access is a completely, like, if you threw that into, there would just be no way
Yeah.
that these people would be able to start a business and set aside, and be able to make a profit on it.
But what
Um,
did you say is making the situation better for them in the case of?
I think it's just changed in some of the local state policies, and that
Okay.
there's been lobbying by certain organic groups and people who are sort of doing the liaison between the farmers and the regulating bodies. And so they're making it a little bit easier for them. I don't really
Okay.
know the details. This is something that I am planning to follow up in one of my Substack posts because I want to kind of bring people, readers, up to speed. If you read the book and you're really depressed, I want people to know that things are maybe better now. And so stay tuned for all the details on that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
also, I mean, in terms of now that you talk about the audience and who is accessing this information, how do you think? Well, first, how do they react about this? Apart from liking the story and being inspired by it, on that end, how can they help this activism? Because one thing is to know about them, but then how they can. And I think it's very important that you are tracking what's going on. Maybe people are more involved in that way and they have ideas and they take action. But how do you see on the other side people being active about this?
Yeah, I think a lot of my writing in this area has been for publications like Civil Eats. I don't know if you know it. It's an online magazine and they do great reporting on agroecology and are doing a really good job of tracking the governmental regulations and
Uh,
changes that are going on. And when NPR had this channel called The Salt, I don't know if you remember
Mhm.
that.
yeah.
I used to
Hmm.
write for that too.
Yeah.
But I felt that a lot of the articles that I was writing, maybe once in a while I did Wall Street Journal stories and, some more mainstream things, but a lot of the articles that I was writing, I felt were kind of preaching to the converted. So, in
Yeah.
other words, these are people who already are on board. They're already buying organic and regenerative. They're supporting local farmers. They're going to farmers markets, or they have CSA box subscriptions. And so I think what I really hoped to do with a general trade book is to reach across the aisle and talk to people who maybe don't really know what a food system is.
Yes,
And
exactly.
again, it goes back to that sort of COVID pandemic era awakening. And when I was writing the book, I would say to my husband, like, who is going to read a book about supply chains? Like, it just seems so
Mm,
geeky and
yeah.
so boring. But I feel like maybe we're at a moment where, people are more aware of where their
Yeah.
food comes. I've also been told by a lot of people that when people have children, especially moms of
Mm,
newborns,
yeah.
they become very concerned about,
They
where
have
their
to
food
face
is.
that question. Yeah.
Yeah, and now we know about all the microplastics, and we know so much more about ultra processed foods,
Yeah.
things that are kind of filtering into the everyday um, kind of Walmart shopper who maybe is getting a little bit more aware of the fact that they need to pay attention to where their food is coming from, who's growing it. The idea, my hope is that people just realize the basic fact that, okay, if I go to my Kroger's or my Safeway or my Walmart, I am part of this very long chain, very big commodity food system. And I don't want to demonize it because I have a whole section in the produce section that talks about Walmart carrying more organics. And of course, I want anyone who can afford to eat organically. So I think one point that I try
Mm,
to make really forcefully is that I'm not only saying you have to go small organic farmers market,
Hmm.
but I'm saying the two food systems really need to meet more in the middle, and big agriculture has to, and it's really happening. People are big farmers are starting to do things like cover cropping and doing less inputs because it improves the soil, it improves yields, and it saves them money when fertilizers from Ukraine or wherever the supply chain is being disrupted or it's getting very expensive. These are ways that you can reduce your costs and improve your yields if you're doing it well. And so, not to say, you have to just look for that small artisanal whatever, but just that you can be aware that there are different ways of producing food and there's this alternative food system. And really, wherever you live, you can sort of find representatives of that food system and you can support them in your own way. And so I think because if you read the whole book, you see so many different aspects of the food system where people are doing the same thing. They're giving an alternative to the commodity food
mm-hmm.
option. You have a more local, more sustainable, more climate friendly version, and you can opt to do that. So, I talked to a beer brewer in St. Paul who she and her husband started this small brewery, and they were very passionate about sourcing local grains, creating a local food chain. And they're brewing beer with this perennial grain called kernza, which is incredibly good for the soil because you don't have to replant it every fall. It's perennial, so it stays. The roots are really long. They replenish the soil. They decrease flooding. There's so many ways that this crop is giving back to the ecosystem and mitigating climate change. And so there are so many reasons to want to brew with it. It's a little bit harder. So they have a whole series of beers, and Patagonia has adopted this too, where it's 1% kernza. And
Mm-hmm.
if you think about the scale of the beer industry and how even if you have 1% that's regenerative, it's really moving the needle on climate change and all of the things that you're trying to achieve by farming regeneratively. And so her motto or her mantra was, small changes do matter and they do make a difference. So I'm hoping that readers of the book read this and realize, okay, by my actions, I too can start helping to move the needle and change our food system.
I'm glad you brought up kernza because I was actually reading that chapter, reading over it this morning. So kernza, it's like a Eurasian grass, right?
Yeah, I think it's originally maybe from the steppes of, yeah, the Eastern European Russia, Ukraine.
And how long has it been in use in the
It's
U.S.?
got like a 40-year journey.
Okay.
A seed was isolated by a woman scientist actually at Rodale, I think in the early 1980s. And, it's just a grass that they keep improving, planting cycle after planting cycle. And the Land Institute in Kansas is doing a lot of work on this, as is University of Minnesota. So that's the brewery. It's in Minnesota. But the people I was talking to at the Land Institute were talking about how, right now it's still a pretty small grain, so you can't use the same threshing machines that you
Hmm.
can for regular size wheat. So that's one of the big challenges, to try to get it up to speed where you can use a bigger percentage of it. There are various challenges, but that's one of them. And just the speed at which they are improving the grain each cycle has really accelerated. I don't know if it's exponentially, but to a very great degree. So it's just cool to meet people like that, or organizations that have been working on this for a long time. And kernza is just one of 5 different crops that they're trying to perennialize, meaning that, it's less soil disturbance. So you can just plant it, and it keeps on coming up every year. So it's part of a much bigger picture of how people are working to create these more
Mm.
regenerative and climate friendly crops.
And I think in the book it said something like in a few decades the yields will be comparable to wheat.
Yeah, that's what they're predicting, because they've done such a good job of accelerating the improvement cycles.
That's incredible.
And it tastes
Um,
good too.
what's that?
It tastes good too.
Oh yeah, okay. Like how do you eat it directly as
No,
well?
no, no.
Like
Well, I had kernza bread. Um,
okay,
I met with a baker who's baking with kernza, and there's a whole. It was interesting to see how the beverage and the bread and the grain movement all kind of were coming together in Minnesota. So I have tasted kernza bread, which is delicious. Usually, it's only maybe 15% kernza because it doesn't
okay.
get the loft that you can get from other kinds of wheat. But again, people are trying to incorporate it more. In beer, it's just maybe like 1%, maybe a little bit more. But it
Hmm.
does. Sandy was telling me that even tasting the beer from made with the kernza from Kansas versus the kernza from Minnesota had a distinctly different terroir. And so it's fun to also bring that kind of regionality and sort of terroir aspect into a beer like that.
You also went to Central America.
Yes, for one chapter. That was,
Yeah, for one chapter. Can you tell us about that journey?
yeah, it was really great. I was trying to cover kind of our diets,
Hmm.
what do we eat every day, and trying to have a chapter on each of these areas in the food
Yeah.
system. So there's a meat, produce, seafood, grains. I have a seed saving chapter. And then, because I feel like chocolate and coffee are 2 things that we're all addicted to,
Yeah, look at
it's
Juliana's like drinking
kind
coffee as you like
Yeah,
say
like
that.
what did you say? Yes, yes, that.
of indispensable, right? And of course, I
Yeah.
love both. So, and they're not, at least not yet, crops that we can access in North America. So I
Hmm.
thought, okay, this is one that I want to travel for. And I do love Latin America, and it was just a great reason to go back. So I did some research, and I found a really wonderful woman named Emily Stone, who started a cacao brokerage called Uncommon Cacao. You probably
Mhm. I
know
don't
it.
know her personally, but yeah, I've heard a lot about her over the
Yeah,
years, and really incredible what she's been doing.
yeah, no, she's amazing. And, just a passionate person who wanted to create more equity in the supply chain. I mean, if you see how smallholder farmers in both cacao and coffee are treated, it's really abominable.
Hmm.
And so, how do you bring more equity to the whole supply chain, make it shorter, make it, she calls it radical transparency, make it more direct? So, after a lot of reporting, I found her and I said, I'd love to visit a producer. And she recommended Maya Mountain, which she actually kind of created this co op in her very early years before she started Uncommon Cacao. So she spent 4 years in Belize helping to create this uh, farm, basically, this group of farmers, realizing that they had to have a central fermentation facility because one of the sort of the bottlenecks of really doing it high quality and in a cost efficient way while still maintaining the integrity of the cacao product
Hmm.
was to have a centralized fermentation facility, because she described these peasant farmers who were trying to ferment in their backyards, and they had,
Yeah.
animals running around and stuff getting in the fermentation boxes, and it was really a stretch. They thought that they would save money by doing it that way because they're sort of doing it all
Right,
themselves.
yeah, that happens a lot in Latin America. I've seen of trying to do everything themselves, to try and centralize the income, I guess. But yeah, it's not quite as easy as a lot of NGOs kind of make it out to be sometimes.
Right. And yeah, so she helped get this beautiful centralized fermentation facility going. She went in, and so many of the cacao farmers had been burned. I mean, Green and Blacks was there. Some of the big cacao companies had
Hmm.
come in. Hershey's was in there for a while. There was this period where the CIA was really trying to combat communism, and so they were doing all kinds of, manipulative things with the
I'm
government.
sure. God.
So there's that whole ugly history of, propping up bad governments. And meanwhile, you have these people coming in promising the farmers all kinds of great income, and then they would stay for,
Yeah.
a couple years, and then they're out, and the farmers are burned because they've
Yeah.
invested all this
Yeah,
money.
it happens over and over again in the
Yeah,
region. Like, and not just with cacao,
Mm.
but like everything. It's like somebody's always coming in promising something that's not sustainable in the long term, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
really hard.
Yeah, it's a pattern, I guess, because the same thing with coffee. So yeah, she said, go to Maya Mountain. They were great. Wonderful woman named Diane Coy, who's basically the manager on the ground there. And I visited several of the women farmers and got to see the whole harvesting and then the transaction. And what's really wonderful is they're collecting the pulp, several times a week. I forget how many exactly, so that it's always fresh, and then they're fermenting continuously, and they're paying cash the day that they pick up the harvest. So it's very much putting money
Hmm.
into farmers' pockets directly.
Mm.
And I'd be interested to know your feelings on fair trade, Nick, and what you've seen in
Uh,
Latin. It's kind of a big,
yeah,
just
I mean that's a difficult one, and I know you dove into it a little bit in the book, and yeah, I mean and I kind of I agree with you. It's like the idea of fair trade's nice, but it just doesn't always work in the way that it should. The practice kind of doesn't always add up.
yeah. I mean, what I heard from both reporting on cacao and on coffee is that There's corruption.
Hmm.
The money goes to sort of whoever's the head of the local village operation, and depending on how fairly it's distributed, it could be good, or often it's not so good.
Yeah.
And so the people in my chapter are really, we're kind of down on it. But then I also spoke to Jonathan Rosenthal, who was one of the founders of Equal Exchange. And he kind of had a tempering view, saying that, a lot of it is about putting putting power, sort of self-determining power, into the hands of the growers, and if done correctly, the fair trade model can do that. And so
Hmm.
that's challenged, no matter what the how you're paying for it. It's just like how self-sustaining is it, and how can these farmers just really operate on their own. Um, so it's very complicated, and again, it's
Yeah.
hard to do justice.
That's the thing. It's like there's so many just regional and micro regional challenges among all of these growers all over the region that it's really hard to put just kind of one philosophy or policy behind things to kind of
Mm.
try and change them. That's I think that's what's hard sometimes. Like something that might work in one place doesn't work.
Mhm.
Something that works in the Venezuelan Amazon might not quite work in
Right.
Guatemala or whatever. And I think sometimes we want just like one idea to work when in
Yeah.
reality we need thousands of them.
Right. And that also argues for, a short, direct chain of
Yeah.
custody where you, at the buyer end, know the growers, you know the circumstances, you can sort of tailor it to whatever the situation is in this community, and try to make it as equitable as possible for these growers. Because when you have a giant corporation in Europe
Hmm.
calling the shots and telling how things should be done, it's just, or governments trying to impose top down policies. It's very difficult, I think, to sort of get those nuances right.
Yeah, but I mean, at the very least, fair trade does. It is a symbol that most people recognize now. It is something you
Yeah,
can put on a bar of chocolate or bag of coffee, and the buyer will feel more comfortable. Whether it's perfect or not. At the very least, it's some form of security, I guess, in the chain. Sometimes,
yeah,
even though it's
I,
not perfect.
yeah. I mean, I'm not
Uh,
sure, because there have been allegations about Rainforest Alliance, and it's
Oh
it's,
yeah,
it's complicated. I think again, knowing as much as you can about who you're buying from, and talking to them, and seeing what's on their material, seeing how much they talk about the sourcing. Um, Lisbeth Pacheco, who is a Guatemalan woman, I also talk about in the chapter, who has a wonderful business in Florida called Ethos Coffee Roasters. And she's from Guatemala, and so has been able to develop these short supply chains, not just Guatemala, but all over Central America.
hmm,
And so her advice was really good. The more information you see on the package, the more likely is that these people have met the farmers,
mm.
know who they're buying from, and are treating them well. And it's just, there is still a lot of kind of greenwashing
oh
going
yeah,
on in
yeah, yeah,
those, even these packages where you like, here's the farmer, and
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I like it's. I've noticed this happens a lot with quinoa. Like quinoa, it's it'll say grown in Peru, but where in Peru? Like is it being grown on the coast? Where it's not native and they're just spraying it with pesticides and doing all
Yeah.
this other stuff so they can mass produce it at
Mhm.
scale, or is it being from a cooperative in the Andes? And usually it's not. It's the cheap crap on the
Mm.
coast,
Mm.
and nobody wants to put that on the packaging. They'll say from Peru, so it sounds good, but then when you
Exactly.
ask around, it's like, but that's part of the consumer's job to kind of
Yeah,
understand that, and that's the hard part.
that's
But
the hard part.
that's yeah, I think if, you were asking about fair trade, and I think it has become this label that if you don't keep an eye on it as an active
Hmm.
consumer, then it means nothing, right? Because it's a marketing strategy, and you cannot know what that means for real. But this, or what I find challenging is these are still even large scale production of food and the industrial production of food and ultra processed goods are still a symptom of something else. So we usually relate this issue of small farming and cooperatives with, versus this other way of doing agriculture. But that's still, for me, it seems to be a symptom of something else, which is, again, who owns the land, inequality, democratic systems, power, and how political forces and different governments affect this in the end, and big corporations. But it's still, uh, I know that talking about fair trade is important, and small farming and large scale farming, but I think in the end, it's all related to inequality and larger social problems. And I wonder how to invite the audience to connect those things in a way that they still support these efforts of women and small farming, but they don't lose perspective of why this is happening. And this is a symptom of something else that we have to be active about too. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I
It's a
totally
question.
agree. Yeah, I mean, that's why I hope to give a picture of more of an overview of.
Yeah.
So in every chapter, I talk about how the commodity system works, and it's about the capitalism of the Industrial Revolution and
Mm.
how you could make more money by being more efficient and creating economies of scale, and
Yeah.
how inevitably this is squeezing the producer. Um, and so I think that's part of what you're talking about, the basic inequity in
Yeah.
our society and how our economies work. And so I'm hoping that people have more of a sense of just how that large commodity long chain system works and how people are trying to forge something that is much more equitable and much harder to do, but ultimately going to be better for your health, better for the planet, and biodiversity in the planet, which is being so severely affected by polluted waters from fertilizer runoff.
Yeah.
Um, I talk about how the externalities of our global food system has been estimated to cost $12 trillion a year. So these are all costs that you're not paying when you get the cheapest commodity,
Hmm.
quinoa, whatever it is. All of that is just being thrown off onto the environment, onto um, the global south, places that don't have the wherewithal to fight for themselves, or they're just in the wrong place geographically.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think it's hard to get to those bigger level issues, but
Yes.
it's something that I was trying to do in the book.
I love the idea of how in the Substack you want to keep track yourself of some of these stories, because they make
Yeah,
them a more tangible things for readers once they moved out on from the book, right? Like, no, no,
yeah.
don't,
I mean,
don't.
yeah,
Yeah,
lives continue and stories develop, and
yeah,
it's
these
the
things
movie
are
ends.
happening right now.
What
Yeah,
happens after?
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious your take on the tariff situation. Like, aside of Donald Trump being a complete moron, inept businessman, I could go on and on about everything he's done and how he does it and blah blah blah. Is there something to the tariff, the idea of tariffs in kind of shortening global supply chains?
I just see it creating turmoil and uncertainty, and
Like aside of like I'm just like take Trump out of it. Like just like that's been my challenge all along is trying to
Yeah,
think anything he does, it's just I hate it automatically. But
right.
like I try to think outside of it and in the long term, if it was done in a reasonable manner to where it was very gradual, could something positive like come out of an idea like that?
I think it
Hmm.
depends what product you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, because, like, if you're talking about coffee or chocolate, which you have to bring in, and
Yeah.
then you're paying a lot more because of the tariffs, as opposed to, sorry,
It's okay.
yeah, probably get these things. Um, as opposed to if you're benefiting from your product being exported and then it's opening up markets for whatever
Hmm.
your product is overseas,
Yeah.
then you might benefit. But I feel like sorry, I forgot to turn
It's
my mic. um, yeah. um, yeah, I think it depends on who the farmer is, which direction the trade is going. These things are so complicated. We don't know, like NAFTA. I mean, I think probably most people in Latin America, who are progressive and
mm,
think about food systems and things would say that was a really bad thing. And opening up this kind of free trade was really destroying. I mean, I saw it in Mexico,
mm,
not having locally grown tomatoes, for
yeah.
example, and things like that. But in a way, now, because Canada and the US and Mexico have NAFTA, they're basically exempt from a lot of these ridiculous tariffs. And, so I just think it's really hard to tease out all the
Yeah.
implications. And I think
Right.
people still don't know. Yeah, I mean, a lot
There's
of
no way of
the talk
knowing.
recently has been like, even though it's horrible, it's disruptive, maybe it's a good thing,
Mm.
for the US
No,
because,
I've been trying to ask myself that, like, if we do want shorter supply chain, obviously things like coffee and cacao, that's not going to work. How do we encourage, these more regional supply
yeah, I
chains to
mean,
develop? Like you mentioned in the book, like the baker who's the einkorn wheat growing 5 miles from her house, but it has to be shipped off to like Wisconsin, like another
yeah,
state to like be
right,
processed. Like,
right.
is something like this a way to build more regional, suppliers
Well,
and
I
stuff?
think
I
in
don't know.
general, yeah, I think in general, if tariffs are making things more expensive to buy from abroad, it promotes people, you know, why we
Yeah.
should just be growing our own locally and regionally and not dealing with this kind of thing. A weird thing is happening here in Canada where it used to be really hard if you lived in Ontario to get wine from British Columbia. There's a
Okay.
lot of great wine there. And now that, everyone's banning California and this and that, and tariffs are so high, um, Canadians are realizing why can't we just buy from each other? Like
Yeah.
it's such a no brainer.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things are kind of like a good byproduct of all this
Mhm.
tariff uncertainty. But yeah, I think in a way that's driving more people to want to create the shorter
Mhm.
thing where tariffs just don't even figure in because you're producing it right there. There are issues of climate, though, like in Minnesota, they're trying to create this, complete short supply chain for beer. And I talk in the book to people in Wisconsin who are trying to grow hops. And, there's certain, it's hard to grow certain things. And I talked to beer brewers in Ontario too. And because of the humidity and the climate, it's just not as easy. Or I have the example of orchards in New England who are at a severe disadvantage compared to the Pacific Northwest because their climate is much easier to
Mhm.
grow apples and pears. And so they had to come up with this whole eco certification because if you tell someone who really only wants to buy organic, that we had to spray a little bit because otherwise we wouldn't have
Hmm.
anything here in the Northeast, then it's kind of like, I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to buy organic from Washington State.
Yeah.
So they had to have this whole education process. We have this is the organization Red Tomato, which is really great. So they came up with this eco certification process, working with scientists and growers and saying, look, we're doing the absolute minimum that we have to.
Hmm.
If we have to spray, we're not doing it when the fruit is developing. It's before pollination or before it's really affecting the final product. But it takes a huge amount of education and, a real desire on the part of the consumer to support local. But that's
Hmm.
a big ask for the consumer. Like, you
Yeah.
have to know about this, you have to understand the eco certification, you have to care about your local orchards. Um, so that's just an example of the kinds of challenges that these women are facing when they're trying to build these really, I think, amazing short supply chains and local and regional food systems.
Yeah, you give a few ideas of like how people can support that, right? Like trying to motivate people to do that, and
Yeah, I
also
try
some
to,
of them do.
make it
Yes,
actionable.
yeah, yeah,
I
which
think
is
it's
great.
kind of
But
what
will
people
you,
are looking for.
yeah, yeah, will you say, I mean, all your trips and so much field work and interviews, conversations, observation, will you say there is a common mindset or something key that might make these efforts viable? Like something you identify all those people share in the way they are going about this?
Yeah, I think that there really has to be sharing of knowledge, and I write about examples of organizations that are really doing a good job of this, like Green Wave, the
Mm,
regenerative ocean farming
yeah.
organization. They have an incredible kind of like knowledge hub and information sharing. They're collecting data, they're sharing it, um, they're trying to collect best practices. Corey Carmen, in her way, is doing that. Organic Valley, they have these regular farmer meetings and they have like young farmer meetings. So many people have told me that the peer-to-peer learning, if you're a rancher and
Mm,
you're talking to
yeah.
another rancher from another state who is going through the same
Yeah, how
challenges,
they exchange
sharing.
knowledge. Yeah.
And I give the example of a baker here in Toronto, Dawn Woodward, who's very connected to bakers in the UK, bakers at the
Mm,
Bread Lab in Washington State, who are really pioneers in trying to bring back affordable regional whole grain baking. um, I think it's kind of what keeps them going in a way, to be able to go to Washington State or go to the UK and really feel like you're part of a community, and people are all in this fight together. So I do think that's one thing that's really important, and I think people recognize it too. Many of my sources told me about just how important the person to person network building is, but not just in your own little network, but connecting networks across the country and across the world.
No, I found it very hopeful. The book, like even though they
yeah.
all, I thought it was a very hopeful book, and I think that's why I
Yeah.
appreciated it so much. And even though there's so many challenges to all of these women, all of these
Right.
producers everywhere, but these networks are growing and they are having an impact on in a lot of different ways. And even if like one project fails, sometimes the seeds are planted for
Yeah.
something to come after it.
And I see really hopeful signs among children too. Like, I've done a lot of reporting on community gardens or recycling projects, and you teach children at a really young age the importance of things like recycling or growing your own produce organically. And it just, it's really setting the template for their whole lives and how they're going to shop. And I've talked to parents who said it was my child who made me buy the organic free range eggs or whatever, go to the farmer's market. So I think that's really hopeful too. And I think, yeah, the education component is really important.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like when I was growing up, there was nothing. Like I had no information whatsoever about what I was eating. It was just the important thing, at least my family, was just to eat because I was a skinny kid, so it was just like just eat. It doesn't matter if it's fast food or just
Yeah.
some boxed
Do
crap from the
it.
supermarket.
Yeah.
It was just eat. But
Well, how did you come to this, where you are now?
that's a long story. Yeah, but no, but I think I mean, I think I was became aware when I started writing about food when I was in college, and and all my friends worked in restaurants, and I started writing for the student newspaper at Ohio State. It was called the Lantern, and there was a food column, so I started writing it. And just because I wasn't interested in sports or student government or
Yeah.
anything, and like I wanted to write about travel and things and poetry and things like that. But that was the closest thing, at least in the student newspaper, was food. But then I started, questioning, talking to people about where the food was coming from, and and why, I didn't know any farms growing up. The only farms I knew were these like endless fields of corn on the side of the highway. There wasn't a farmer attached to it. It was just all this like stuff that
Did you grow up
we
in Ohio?
weren't even eating. I grew up in Ohio, yeah, in Columbus, Ohio,
Yeah.
and yeah, like I did. The only farm I knew, like as a kid, like in school, was this place called Slate Run. It was this historical farm, so it's like they dressed up in bonnets and like so. It was like it made me think that food isn't done made like that anymore. It was just this historical thing that they ate in 1780, and not and now we just get things from the supermarket from who knows where. And
Yeah, I spoke to the woman who heads the Artisan Grain Collaborative in the Midwest. She grew up someplace like Ohio. Same thing, you're surrounded by these giant monocultures,
yeah,
but A, they're faceless. You don't know the farmers. Everything is getting shipped off. You're not eating it there. And then for a number of my sources, it took going to Europe or another country where
yeah,
you see a vastly different food system.
yeah,
And
totally. Like the first time I like went to Europe and tasted what just a apple in this in a little market in the street tasted like. I was like, oh my god, it's supposed to
Yeah.
taste like this.
kind of like
Revelation.
a light bulb moment where
Yeah,
food can really taste good. And yeah, so I think a lot of people were impacted by their travels and then came back. It's sort of like the Alice Water stories, but so many people in my book really said that the same thing to me. It was going to Italy or was going to France that sort of made them realize that there was another way to grow food and to distribute it. Um, yeah.
yeah. Okay, well,
Yeah, it was just one last thing that you mentioned. How, I mean, following the logic of in a local food system, as these people you interacted with show, everything has to be connected, and you have to understand how the system works to to relate with it in a way that makes sense for everyone and everything in the system. But so these local food systems are not isolated from other local food systems and the global food system, right? So if you follow that logic, these people have to be connected with other people doing the same. They have to. It's part of the logic of the local food system.
Mm-hmm.
And that balance between, and that applies to other things, between local and global, is very important, especially in an era in which we have gone all the way globalized in crazy ways, in overwhelming ways, in not healthy ways sometimes.
Mhm.
But we have to see the healthy ways too, which are part of being local. So I was just thinking about it. I think it's great you mentioned how these people are naturally and intuitively and practically connecting with peers, not
Yeah,
necessarily, right there next door.
it's so powerful, and it
Yeah.
makes you feel less alone because the work is so hard. And I saw this in the sake world too. Sake makers in the U.S. connecting with sake makers in Japan, and they
Yeah.
don't even have the same language, but they're using Google Translate and they're learning
Yeah.
from each
They
other.
find their ways. Yeah.
It's one of the nice things about the global connectivity is the way you can way more easily share
Yeah.
technical knowledge or brewing knowledge or whatever you're trying to share. So I think that's, it's one positive thing.
Yes. Well, thank you for showing that too, or addressing it.
So, what's the next book, Nancy? Have you thought that much far ahead?
I'm a little bit tired because I had two books basically going to print at the same time. I worked on this very long 15-year project of Japanese
Translations, right? Like,
poetry book
yeah.
translation. It was a wonderful, very rewarding project because it had to do with my own family and their poetry. And I worked with a team that I really love. But it was, that's part of what made this so difficult. I was doing that at the same time as I was trying to do the final edits on this book. So I kind of taking a little break. I'm going
Yeah.
to do my Substack, and I do have some short-term projects that I'm working on. My team and I are working on an essay on Japanese poetry translation, a long series of essays I did on the U.S. government prison Camp Manzanar and the photography that was done there by very famous photographers like Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams. I want to turn that into kind of a little book, and that's
Okay.
been on the back burner. You know how you have projects
Yeah.
that you trying to get to them. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm sort of thinking maybe I could do some of those and then think about the next
Yeah.
big project. I mean, I have some ideas, but they're not to the point where I can even articulate them very
Right.
well.
Right. What's the name of your Substack before I forget?
I just launched it. It's called Reaping by
Okay.
Nancy
Okay.
Matsumoto.
Yeah. I haven't followed it yet. I
Yeah.
saw you post it on like
Right.
Instagram, so I
It's
just
my,
haven't
Yeah.
got it over to
yeah,
Substack
no,
yet,
I
but I
have
will.
to.
Okay.
thank you.
Reaping. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. It was a real pleasure to
You,
finally meet you.
thank you so
Yes.
much
So the
for
Thanks
book
so
inviting
is,
me.
much.
yeah, Reaping What She Sows: How Women Are Rebuilding Our Broken Food System, and it's out now, right? Or no, it's
October 28th.
okay, but the pre-sales are
Oh,
open.
yeah.
Okay.
Pre-sales, wherever books are sold, you can order it.
All
And
right.
yeah, October 28th is the pub date.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It
Thank
was
you so
great
much,
to
Nancy, and
thank you. Great to
congratulations.
meet you.
Likewise.